Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. Welcome to the September 2019 Houston Clutter Coaching Meetup. I'm your moderator, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas. Our topic today is making home work, organize and design a functional space. Before we get started, a few notes for those who are joining us for the first time via Zoom. Gayle will present some ideas about the topic, and then she'll answer your questions. If you think of a question as we go along, please feel free to share it via the chat in Zoom, and I'll try to make sure Gayle answers it before we get away to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature to let me know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment yourself via audio or video. We're also streaming the meetup live on Facebook for the first time today. I'll do my best to keep up with any comments or questions that come to us via Facebook too. And now over to you, Gayle.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Houston Clutter Coaching September 2019. Our topic today is making home work, organize, and design a functional space. And thanks if you're watching on Facebook Live. This is our first attempt, so thanks for joining us, however you're watching us via media today. A frequent question for an organizer most of the time when I go to people's houses is, how do I get started decluttering a space? I don't know where to start. But the flip side of that is, how do I plan a space right from the beginning to have it be functional and organized? And so we're going to give a little bit of equal time today to how do you start from scratch and launch a space as functional and organized to begin with, so that it serves your family and that you get the best use out of the space. And we'll see if we can give you some ideas to start a space from scratch, especially if you're moving someplace new, right? It happens when you're getting ready to move to a new home. It's the moment when you feel the least amount, like you have the least amount of time to focus on it, but it is the opportunity for you to do the advanced planning that will make that space work well for you. And so if you can give a little bit of time up front in the planning process to get ready for a space and plan its functions, that'd be great. If you find that moving is too overwhelming and at the end you are actually so exhausted that you can't even think about it and you throw everything into the house and now you're going to come back to the planning part at 2 years later, it doesn't matter. Of course, it'll all work out fine either way. So just stand where you are and see if you can plan a space how you want. So let's use a dining room as an example for this process. I'll just use the dining room as to paint a visual while we're talking about the process. And let's talk about those steps. So the first step is that you need to start with a stakeholder, what I think of as a stakeholder conversation. So everybody that uses the room is going to have different ideas about what needs to be done in there and how it needs to look and what kind of furniture they want. And if you start asking everybody in the house, we're standing in the dining room, what does everybody want to do in here? You're going to find some surprising input that you didn't think of or have any idea that they wished for in the process. So asking everybody what kinds of functions they want to do in a particular room. And in our dining room example, I've made up a collection for you. So maybe everybody's going to eat there, of course. It's a dining room and you're going to have dinner there as a family. But then maybe dad is hosting committee meetings once a month, and he's on some committee and all these people come over to his house for a committee meeting. And the dining room is where everybody's going to meet and sit down and take their notes and run their meeting. Maybe the daughter is going to study on the dining room table in the afternoon when she comes home from school, and that's going to be her homework space if she doesn't have it in the room or she needs to be supervised while she's doing homework. And so maybe that's going to be a study space as well. Maybe mom is doing some crafting and she is using the table on the weekends to do her craft stuff. So there's a whole bunch of function that is going to go on in this dining room, and you need to plan for all of it so that it can all be handled and function smoothly, correctly. So we want to accommodate all those choices. So any room that you pick is going to have multiple functions. Another one that immediately comes to mind is there's always a guest room slash something, guest room slash office, guest room slash craft room, guest room slash major storage room, whatever it is, there's always a rooms that have more than one function in them. And so you want to be able to accommodate all those things and plan in advance for all those functions by talking to everybody that's going to use the room. And you'll be really surprised about what people have to say about it. You want to consider everything and make sure that you accommodate all of them. So let's talk about the dining room. If you have 4 people in the family and you're going to sit down to eat, then that means you got to have dining space for 4. But if dad's committee meetings are for a larger group, then maybe you need to have a table for 8, because 8 people need to be able to sit around and plug in their laptops and take notes or whatever and write and have snacks. And so while a smaller table would accommodate just you guys having dinner, the immediate family, you're going to need a larger seating area for the committee meetings that are going to come in. When the daughter's doing homework, she just needs a corner of the table, but she also needs to have a way to plug in her laptop and her phone easily, and maybe she needs to have some school supplies nearby. The weekend crafting means that you probably need a work surface to craft on so you don't destroy the dining table underneath. And then there's also going to be supplies. You want access to the project you're going to work on, that kind of stuff. So that function of crafting in that table, you probably won't use the whole table, but you're going to pull things out and work with them, and you're going to need to be able to pull supplies in and then move them back when it's time for dining. You also want to find out everybody's preferred look and storage method. And by that, I mean that some people really like to have everything out and they want to be able to see it. And some people really like everything to be hidden. And so they can not see anything until they need it and they go pull everything out. Some people like it to be pretty, even if it's not functional. So for them, pretty is the priority. And for some people, functional is way more important than pretty. They're not worried about how it looks. They want it to be functional. And so you may find that your family members are not in agreement about that everybody has a different point of view. And so you'll have to do a little negotiating here. If mom wants it all hidden because she wants to look pretty and dad wants it all out because he's got to be able to see it, you guys are going to have to come to some kind of compromise about how much can be out and how much has to be hidden so that it will be available for everybody to see. After you negotiate amongst those conflicting points of view, there's always some compromise that will work for everybody. And so having those be on the list so that you can negotiate around them and make good choices between you, then you'll be able to plan. And you want to do that in advance and find out where the conflicts are so that you don't do a whole bunch of stuff to set up a room and then realize that you have to undo a bunch of it because you're in conflict with somebody else that needs to use the room. So invest the time to discuss it up front and, do your collective bargaining until everybody is happy with the compromise. Okay, so that's step 2. And let me just say step 1, I think it may require more than one conversation. It may require a great detailed discussion. It may require some prioritizing about what needs to be done. And you may have to choose that one of the functions that you wanted to be in there really needs to be located in another room after all, because it's too much in conflict with the other things that need to be there. So just make sure you give adequate time to that conversation for all the people that are going to use the room so that you get a good result. Step 2, now that you know what the functions are going to be and you've figured out who's going to do what in there, now you can decide what furniture and storage ideas. So let's consider which of the functions will happen the most often and make sure that you've got easiest solutions to cover that function. Storage has to be accommodating what's going to be in there. So furniture is the first thing to consider. For instance, in our dining room, you probably, since we got to seat 8 people when it comes time for the committee meetings, then having a dining room table that is small enough for 4 and can't sit 8 people around the table isn't really going to work for both functions. So first things first, you've got to have a dining room table that will seat 8. And then you're going to have 8 chairs, right? But you probably don't want to have it set up to 8 all the time. And so you can, for instance, get a table that expands, right? There's tables that pull apart and have leaves drop in the middle. And so you can leave it at a small family size most of the time. And then once a month or twice a month when a committee meeting happens, you can pull the table out and drop a leaf in and add the extra chairs. when those 8 chairs that you're going to have for the 8 people are not in use, you don't want them sitting around the table crowding it. And so maybe they're going to be up against the wall, or maybe they get rolled into a closet somewhere, so that you subtract the 4 extra chairs for the 29 out of 30 days when you don't need them. Something to consider. You want to have space to sit everybody for dad's function, but you don't want to be living with a bunch of extra chairs sitting around the room when you don't have to for the majority of the time when they're not in use. So accommodate where you're going to get the bigger table, but you're going to have to find a place to store the extra chairs most of the time. Something to consider. For storing in the room, you'll need some kind of cabinet or shelving unit or buffet in our imaginary dining room that will hold the table linens, for instance, or the decor that's going to go on the table. You may need a separate rolling cart for, here's what we're going to do with the daughter's school supplies. Maybe she needs a little bit of school supplies while she's working. The crafting stuff that's going to happen with mom, there's probably going to be a bunch of crafting stuff that has to come in, and you don't want that necessarily to be living out all the time. But this is where that conversation with the stakeholders is important. If mom's going to craft every day of the month, then her storage for the craft stuff may be a little bit more permanent in there than if she's only going to do it on the weekends or for 3 or 4 hours, and then she's going to want to put it away because she don't want to look at it. And so if she's going to put it all away most of the month and she's going to pull it out for a few hours on the weekends, then having a portable storage for that stuff so that it can roll into the room and then roll back out of the room, roll into the closet and roll out of the closet. Or if you get some kind of cabinet, a permanent piece of furniture, then the stuff can go in a cabinet and the doors can be closed, and then it can be out of the way when the committee doesn't need to be looking at all mom's craft supply. So you need to be able to plan easy access to the stuff that you need, and also easy subtraction when it's in the way. So planning that kind of, maybe we want some rolling carts, maybe we want some boxes or bins that are easily carried back and forth, and they can live in a closet, for instance. If you're going to cart the stuff back and forth every time, they can go on and off a shelf in a closet, and they come down and go out when mom wants to craft, and then they can be returned to their storage area. I'm making a very specific example about adapting the dining room to functions, but the concept is the same about whatever room you're going to talk about, right? Whatever you need to use in that room, it's an office. And if it's an office / guest room, then you're going to need your office supplies in there, and a place to put your laptop down, and a place to sit and type while you're working. And that needs to not be in the way when you have a guest in the room that's sleeping and needs to hang up their clothes and needs to, have some place to put their stuff on the nightstand. And so whatever room that you're contemplating the functions, you're just going to have to think about how easy will it be for me to put one function away in order to set up the next function, and how permanent do those functions need to be in the room versus 100% portable. So there's going to be a scale depending on how often, in the guest room, it's going to be, 365 days, and, a week of that is going to be somebody sleeping in the room, and all the rest of the 51 weeks are going to be you working in the office. And so the idea of making some of the office stuff a little bit more permanent, and just having it a way that you can move some of the stuff to the side so that the other half of the room can be used as a guest room, is part of the planning process. So we talked about storage. We talked about, the size. So don't forget to consider the size of what's going to be stored versus the container that you're going to put it in. So you can't get a bookshelf that's only a foot deep and then if you're in our dining room example, for instance, if you have a bunch of platters that are literally 2 feet across and 2.5 feet wide, you can't go put those on a bookshelf that's only a foot deep. So you need to consider the contents that are going to go in the storage before you go and buy the storage. So sometimes people go shopping and go, let's get a dining table, and that's a pretty buffet. And they never think about, is that buffet deep enough for the stuff that I actually want to put in it? So just give yourself that little moment of, what actually am I going to store? And then will it fit on what I'm thinking is going to go in the room? Step number 3, we're going to talk about deciding what kind of work surface needs to be there and supported. And in our dining room example, the dining table, you put a tablecloth on it or you don't. It has a glass top or it's a pretty wood or whatever, and you can put little placemats down and you're done. But then when the kid is doing homework, you don't want that homework process, the pens, the ink, the staples, the whatever, you don't want that destroying your tabletop, right? So there's some amount of, is a tablecloth on the table enough while the daughter's doing homework, or does there need to be some other removable, portable surface to put on top for her to work on? When the mother's crafting and out comes the X-Acto knife and the glue, you don't want that happening right on top of your pretty dining table, right? So you're going to need some kind of work surface that crafting can happen on top of, and then it can be removed when it's time for food. So just considering the work surface wherever that function is going to take place in the room, and is that work surface adequate? In an office / guest room, you need some kind of tabletop, right? You're going to be putting a laptop down, you're going to be plugging in your phone, you're going to be typing, and you're going to generate paper, and maybe there's going to be a printer. You're going to need some kind of flat surface. Now, that flat surface could be a shelf on a wall, it could be a fold down cabinet in an armoire, it could be a little skinny pop-up table, it could be a card table. I mean, it really doesn't matter what you pick. You just need to consider that if I'm going to permanently have half of this room be an office, then what is my work surface going to be where I'm actually going to get the work done? Is it deep enough for everything I want to put on it? I find often that people think I'm going to use this desk, and then the desk is super narrow, and then they want to put this behemoth printer on top of it, and it takes up the whole table and it's like hanging over the side of the table. So just consider what you need to store and what you need to use, and whether the surface is appropriate for that. People forget that part, and it makes a difference. Now you can decide this is step 4, you can decide what supplies you need to support the function. So just like in the dining room, you're going to want some place to store the linens that go with that table. This is the bedroom equivalent of the sheets that go with that bed get stored under the bed box in the room where the sheets get used, because those supplies get used on that bed and it's right there. And you want to make that accommodation in any room that you plan so that where you store the stuff is near where you're going to use it. And the only caveats for that is, in our dining room example, for instance, we don't want to say the mom doesn't want the craft stuff out all the time because she thinks it doesn't look pretty. So she's going to want to be able to pack it all up and take it someplace nearby, or use a cabinet inside the dining room that she can put things away in. And so you just want that wherever you accommodate the supplies, and whatever supplies you're trying to support the functions in the room, that they can be stored as close to where you're going to use them as possible. It used to be that in an office we had 1 million office supplies, and now we don't do business that way anymore. You don't need as many office supplies as you used to, so there's not as much to accommodate, but you're still going to want a few. Maybe you're going to want a file cabinet drawer, and maybe you're going to want to be able to store a few pencils and paper and a little bit of, something to stuff in the printer. And so you're going to need a little bit of cabinet space for the supplies that you want to go with what you're doing. This is the perfect time, especially if you're doing this around a move or in response to a move, even if it's 2 years later and you haven't quite gotten around to it, and now you're coming back to plan the room after the fact. This is the perfect time for you to recognize that you have moved way more than you need to keep, and that just because you have boxes and boxes and boxes of office supplies doesn't mean you're ever actually going to use them, or you actually need to make space for them. So one of the mistakes that people make is they have 4 million supplies, and I'm using this office as an example. They have 4 million office supplies that they never use, but they spent money on them, or they inherited them, or they're left over from the kids' schools or whatever. And they think that it's office supplies, therefore it needs to go in the office. And so they cram all those office supplies in the office and take up a whole lot of space in the room with stuff that they never intend to use or open. And so you're sort of subtracting your usable footprint that way. You're crowding yourself out of that space with stuff that you don't need. So In the same way that you want to make sure that the supplies are in the room that are appropriate to the function of the room, you also don't want to store and park a bunch of stuff in there that is not going to get used and is not going to support you just because it's generally in the theme of the room. So try to use this as an opportunity to filter those supplies, whatever it is. If it's 47 tablecloths that you're trying to shove into the dining room, you want to go through that collection again and go, so there's 47. Am I really going to change my tablecloth every 3 days? Probably not. And so now's the time to go through that collection and thin it out and decide these tablecloths function and will support my daily dining needs, and these will support my holiday needs, and all of this excess can go to someone else. You don't have to store just everything just because you own it. If you can filter it down to what will actually get used, then you'll find it's much easier to solve your storage problems and make the things that you're going to use in that room be accessible, be easy to get out and put away, and support you in what you want to do in the room. Okay, that's the supplies lecture and the filter your contents lecture. Okay, step number 5. You want to keep some things in mind, like, and this is Ed's, make sure the lighting works for everybody. You want to suit the light to the room's function. So in the office, for instance, maybe you like a lot of light while you're working on the computer, maybe you don't like any light, but then you want to be able to have the person that's sleeping in the bed when they're a guest, you want to be able to make sure that they can turn on a light so they're happy. Planning that beyond, here's what's in the ceiling fan, here's where I'm going to put the lamp. Just think about it in terms of, if your daughter's doing schoolwork on the dining table, does she have enough light so that she can see easily and she's not sitting in the dark? There you go. Consider the accessibility of the room as you design it. So lots of time people decide that they need to keep all the furniture they have, and they just keep finding a place to put it. They just keep adding it into a room and making the room smaller and smaller and smaller. So part of what you want to consider as I'm going to have guests in here and I'm going to have an office in here, is you don't want to jam the room up so that it's really hard to walk back and forth to the bed, or it's hard for the person that sleeps in the bed to get up and get to the bathroom that's on the other side of the room. It's a consideration to make that you want all of the functions to be easily accessible, and you're not having to move things around or go in a really narrow pathway to use the room for what you want it to be used for. So just consider the accessibility. Don't forget to not put things in front of cabinet doors, file cabinet doors. You don't want to stack a bunch of boxes in front of a file cabinet and then you can't open the file cabinet drawer. You don't want to put things in front of close enough to the closet door that you can't pull the closet door all the way open and get into the closet. These are things that get forgotten in the rush of moving in, and then they get ignored. So that's all part of the accessibility. Can you still open all the doors easily? Can you still open the cabinets fully? Maybe it's a break front cabinet that has cabinet doors that swing out. Maybe it's, file cabinet drawers that are blocked by something. Just consider that as you install things, you want to be able to open, get around, and move around the contents easily. And any of your guests people that come to sit in the dining room for the committee meeting, you don't want them to have to squeeze in to get past something. You want it to be easy. So make sure it's a pleasant place to be in. It needs to be someplace that makes your family happy to use it. So that's part of the stakeholder conversation right in the beginning, is that you're going to plan it so that it suits everybody's needs and it generally makes them comfortable in the room. And you will have negotiated a little bit of compromise amongst the family members that are using it. And then, within those parameters, make it so that everybody's happy in there and it's pretty and makes them comfortable and at ease, I guess is the best way to say that.
And Gayle, particularly with respect to guest rooms, you want to make sure that it's easy to get in and out of the room for anyone, but especially for people who may have some mobility issues.
Yes.
If there were an emergency or someone desperately needed to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you want to make sure that they can do that without hurting themselves or getting lost.
Right? Without tripping over something on the floor or in the hallway. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's there's some stakeholders that use the rooms that you're going to have in your house all the time. You know, your family members, the people that reside there, will be familiar with the space, and they will use those rooms. They'll be they'll memorize it, and they'll know where stuff is, and it'll be easy for them to maneuver. And then when you have guests in your home, they are not going to be 100% familiar with your house, and so you want to make those pathways for them much easier to follow, so that they don't have to get trapped by lack of understanding what's going on in the house. And I think the biggest egress problem, the biggest accessibility problem people have is the hallway. If you fill up the hallway with a bunch of stuff, it makes it a lot harder for people that are unfamiliar with the house to maneuver. So just be careful that they're not having to wander down really narrow pathways to get somewhere that they need to get. Okay, step 6 is be prepared to change your mind. Being flexible is super important, and you're going to have these planning sessions, and you're going to talk to people, and then you're going to set it up, but familiarity always changes things a little bit, right? You got to try it out and see how it goes, and maybe it's going to have to be tweaked a little bit, and somebody finds that the chair is too high, and somebody finds that the table is too close to the wall, and it's too hard to get. When there's 8 chairs around the dining table, it's too hard to get to the ones in the corner. Whatever the concept is, just use it for a little bit, and then maybe have a follow-up conversation. How's it going? Are you having a hard time? Is this really working here, or is there a problem? Can we change the accessibility? Can we change the way that it looks? Is it still functioning for everybody? If you do that and tweak it after it's been used for a little while, you'll have a little bit better feedback. Like, we can all imagine what we think is going to happen, and then you use it and you find out that that's not really true. So just be willing to plan and execute what you plan for, and then come back behind and be a little flexible about tweaky, and see if you can get it to work for everybody better.
Gayle, Joe, our friend Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Who is watching on Facebook, said guest rooms really need a nightlight too, and that's a terrific idea.
And that's exactly, you're accommodating the function of the room. A guest is not familiar with your house. They need to be able to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and they will not know where the lights are, and they will not know how to turn them on, and they're going to wake up in the middle of the night and have to figure out how to turn a light on. So having a nightlight someplace so they can aim for the bathroom and the little tiny light over there will make it function for people that are not used to the room. That's perfect planning for that. Very kind and accommodating, actually. The biggest thing I think about designing a space is not being intimidated by the idea that you don't know what's supposed to happen. You're not talking about anything super fancy here, and it really is just a matter of saying, I want to be able to use this room for X, Y, and Z. Who's going to be using it with me? How can they be comfortable while they use it? And don't assume that you know, because you may think that you know what your husband wants, but then when you actually talk to your husband, you will find that he has a completely different point of view. So it's really important for the people that share your space with you that you let them participate in the discussion. Now, you may control the decorating look of the discussion, but what we're not talking about making it pretty in this conversation. We're talking about how to use the room. And so I think that is the most important place to start. What are you going to do there? Who's going to do it there? And what do they need to be able to successfully and easily and comfortably do it? And if you have those conversations, and if you think from that point of view, you can go lay in pretty later, right? You can make it function, and then you can lay pretty in on top of it a little bit and make it be a space that is beautiful and presentable.
Gayle, April asked, could you give some ideas for one spouse that wants everything out in a living area and one that wants everything hidden? That's a toughie. That is a tough one.
That is a tough one. So part of the way that you make that work is it's likely that person is a piler. They like to stack things and they like to see the stacks out. So one of the compromises is to pile in an organized way. So if you think of a stack of in trays that are, one, two, three, four, like this, and each one of those tray slots would be a stack. There's also, if you think of a letter sorter, in an office supply store, they make a letter sorter, which is basically a box that has little paper shelves, and they're designed to sort mail in or sort documents in. And document sorter, they call it that too. But it's basically open slots, right, that you can put paper in. So for somebody who's a piler, you can pile in those slots. So it's sort of like a vertical way to do a file cabinet instead of horizontal, in a row like this. You're doing it up and the slots are stacked. So sometimes pilers find that is sufficient. They can put things in and out of those slots. They can still see all the slots and they can label the slots, and that helps them know where the stuff is. Another out version is paper that is on those standing racks, that it's, wire racks that are, here's a U shape or whatever, and racks back like this. They make wooden versions, they make wire versions, they make plastic versions, but the idea is that you can stand and rack file folders with papers in them, and you can rack them standing up on a surface on a table. If you have a spouse who is actually 100%, like they're only happy if everything is completely spread out all over everywhere and no amount of stacking, piling, filing, racking will work for them, then I think that you have to compromise with how much area on which they can do that. So your solution is, I will give you this 6-foot table in this room against the wall, and you get to cover this table however you want it in whatever spread out way you want. And that's where you have to stay. So it is giving them a space and then defining the space. It needs to stay in this room, it needs to stay on this table, whatever. And so it is a compromise for somebody that likes to hide it all and somebody that likes to have it all out. I'm sorry for this, constant negotiation point in your marriage, and it will be forever. And truthfully, the person that likes it all out really can't function. I mean, I've had people tell me, I put it in the file cabinet, I put it in a file folder and close the drawer, and it's like somebody has erased it out of my mind. Like they can't even remember that it was in there ever once it disappears. So if you want them to be comfortable in the room, you need to give them a way to pile and have it all be out, and maybe limit them to a table, a room, a half of the house, however good your negotiating skills are.
Ginger commented on this topic. We have 2 separate living spaces, his and hers. Husband likes it all out in the open, so I give him a wooden dump bowl for his pocket stuff, racks for his DVDs, etc. And if you have the room to do that,
right?
That's a great. Yeah.
That's a good solution. And everybody's somewhere on the spectrum at a different length, right? And so, the guy that can come home and put all his stuff into a bowl on the table and that's enough for him, that's awesome. And there may be somebody who's more extreme for which that is not enough.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to negotiate what works for you. And you have a right to be comfortable in the house too. And so if all that stuff out everywhere makes you insane, then, a his and hers living space is kind of a good solution. I've heard of people having his and her houses for that very reason. Like they're married, but his stuff is in his house and her stuff is in her house. I think that's kind of an extreme position. I think there's probably a little bit more negotiating room than that, but there's a solution for everybody.
Bonnie commented on night lights. I recently visited a relative and she had the neatest night lights in the hall. Low light with a motion detector that made it brighter when it detected movement. Great for visitors.
Ooh, I like that a lot.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's very cool. We got to find that product.
And April added, thanks, great ideas. My husband really does forget where things are if they are not out. I'll definitely try the table method.
Yeah, he's not just being difficult.
Right.
It really is how his brain works. It's just how he thinks. And so It's how he imagines himself in space. It's how he orients and how he files the pictures in his head. And so he's not being obstinate. He's just really trying to function with how his brain works. And so talking to him about it, this is where that conversation becomes so important, because you can really have a conversation in great detail and say, well, if we do this, is that okay? What if we try that? Go back and forth and keep tweaking it until it's a compromise that works for both of you. It doesn't make him lose control of his environment, make him feel like he can't find or do anything in the room. It just requires more detailed conversations for you to understand what gets in the way for him and what doesn't. And be willing with multiple solutions. Let's try this. Does this work for you? Can this solve the problem and make it okay? Like, this is a compromise that I'm good with. Are you okay with this? If this doesn't work, how can I make it better or worse? How can I make it function better for you? If we trade out A for B, does that still work? Be willing to try until you get to something that he feels comfortable with and that you are okay with as well.
Laurie added, she has a similar issue. Husband likes stuff on countertops. I like a cleaner look, constant battle. So this is definitely a theme for a lot of people.
Right. Well, and this is a thing where, so part of the stuff that's on the counter, for instance, this happens a lot. People come in and they dump things on the way into the kitchen counter. So maybe the solution is that you figure out what kinds of things are ending up on the counter and why he wants them there. And you can address each one with a different solution. So if people don't think about it very hard, they just sort of go and dump it all in one place, and they want it all, and they want it all there for different reasons. But if you sort the stuff out and go, okay, why are the keys here? Is this mail here? Why is this food here? Like, you can examine each category of thing that's being dumped and find out what they're probably there for different reasons. And if you can discuss those reasons and come up with a solution for each reason, then you might be able to make the look a little bit cleaner for you. You can have different containers for different things. Maybe the keys end up by the front door after all in a different container. And, I'm just spitballing here, but the idea being that whoever makes a pile will look at each thing and go, this is the year, homes for everything. Yes, exactly. Like, you got to figure out why the stuff is living on the kitchen counter and what the purpose is for that, and then support those functions, support that purpose with a different solution. So one solution may not solve all the problems, but in the short term, containers always make things look better. So if you have a kitchen counter that gets dumped on all the time, if you have a container that the stuff can be dumped into, at least it's all held by one container, as opposed to sort of loosey-goosey all over the countertop. That's a step up. Loosey-goosey in the box, in the bowl, in the bin is a little bit better than a sea of stuff on the counter. So it might be a compromise that it gets barfed into a bowl that has to be sorted occasionally versus left on the counter.
Kathleen asks, what advice would you give to someone with ADHD for long-term organizing solutions? Perhaps a coach?
Yes. Well, and there's actually, there's a book called DidiFriendly Ways to Organize, and it's been published for a long time. I'm sure you can get it at the library. You can get it on Amazon. Any bookstore will have it. ADD-friendly Ways to Organize. It's a very good book, and it is written with ADD people in mind, so you don't have to read it start to finish. You can just open it up and start reading in the middle. It is a bunch of very practical suggestions for organizing techniques for someone that has an ADHD brain. You do have to learn new coping mechanisms. The standard stuff for neurotypical people, things that I would do, for instance, don't always work for somebody who's ADD, because like we were talking about earlier, the paper, I put things in a file cabinet, and I know that file cabinet here's where my banking records are. I know that. I don't forget that. It doesn't erase for me because I put things in a file. But for an ADD person, that might not be true. And so that's why I talk about filing in a vertical way, so that it's out and you can see all the little things in there standing up on a table. That's a little bit easier for an ADHD person to deal with than files in a drawer. So there are very specific, you have to learn specific coping mechanisms for ADHD people. And luckily, there is a whole lot more out there in the world about this than there used to be. So if you try that book, if you Google ADHD organizing, and you'll just find all kinds of articles, suggestions, podcasts. There's all sorts of people out there making a living talking about this, focusing on this as a method. You just have to do a little research, because there are certainly people figuring out that it needs support, and there's lots of people out there trying to support it. And if you learn methods that work for how an ADHD brain works, you will find that you can be just as efficient and effective as anybody else. You just have to have the processes that work for how your brain works.
Judy asks, any suggestions on handling all the stuff when you want to completely reorganize the room with the same stuff?
So are you saying, how do I manage the stuff in the room while I'm reorganizing it?
I think that's the gist. So I guess, what's your approach to that? If somebody wants to, if the understanding is, you're going to have kind of a wholesale reorganization of the room.
So the first thing that I would do is I would go through the room and open up everything and pull everything out and make your subtractions. Go looking for the stuff that has been stored in the room, is in the drawers, is in the cabinets, is in the closet, that you don't actually want to keep anymore. So it's a pass through to clear out contents. That will subtract some things and make it easier for you to maneuver with what you're doing. Then I would also consider, depending on how much space and room you have, you might want to subtract some things out of the room, like empty the room, vacuum the carpet, sweep the floor, whatever, and pretend like you're moving back in. So subtract everything and move it back. Now, that would be that's a big project, and you might need bodies for that, and you might need help. So that's something you have to plan around moving the furniture. But at the very least, you can box up and take out the small stuff and leave the furniture in the room, and then move the furniture around and vacuum around it, or whatever you need to do to reclaim the floor before you reset everything. The best thing you can do for yourself is thin the herd before you start, and then subtract as much as you can out of the room based on your, resource limitations and your, how much stamina you have and how much time you have for it to be torn up. So you may have to accommodate your own schedule if it's all going to be done in an afternoon, or somebody's going to come in and sleep in that room tonight. So you've got to plan for that. But if you can pull everything out and reinstall, that'd be great. Maybe you pull everything out but the biggest piece of furniture, and then you can move that furniture around while you take care of the floor. And you see what I'm saying? Give yourself the flexibility to move everything around and envision it completely differently. It may help you to draw a plan of the room. So get the measurements of the room and the measurements of the furniture, and sit down with a little paper and pencil and do your little drawings, because that means that you can tell based on the measurements that if I try to put this over here next to this, it won't fit. There's not enough physical length, and you won't have to move the furniture around to figure that out. So doing that little drawing and measuring the furniture, height, width, that kind of stuff to tell. And then you can draw it freehand. There's all sorts of space planning software and applications out there that you ought to be able to get access to. I know people do this kind of space planning on computer all the time, but you can just as easily draw it on a piece of paper and just do the measurements that way. Giving yourself a little bit of, playing around on paper with the furniture first saves your back from moving the furniture around 5 times. And it keeps, your recruited handyman guy, if your son, your husband, or somebody has to be the person to move all the furniture around for you, if you have a good plan before you ask them to move around 5 times, they're more likely to stay with you and help you to the end. Be kind to your helpers.
Judy said, thanks a lot. You got my question right. So
Okay.
we were interpreting that correctly.
Thank you so much. I have to say, while he's looking, thanks everybody for watching on Facebook Live. That was so exciting. I'm hoping that it was an easy way for you to participate and listen to us talk about our topic today.
Joe added, I struggle with the clutter/surfaces issue all by myself. I use baskets and other containers, but I try to sort through the baskets from time to time. It surprises me sometimes how little I use some of the things I think I need near.
And, that just comes with experience and practice, right? If you think that you're going to have it right there and then it sits there for a year and nobody ever touches it, then it was a good idea, but it was a good theory, but not good in actuality. So be honest with yourself about, does it really need to be in here? Am I really going to use this? Does it really need to stay? And this may be a confronting process for you if you didn't do a lot of purging and donating or redistributing when you moved because you didn't have time, or you did a bunch and you couldn't do it all, whatever happened. You may find that there's a whole lot in the room. It's like, why is this stuff still here? And sometimes it just takes looking at things more than once. Like you looked at it during the move and you ran out of steam and you were tired, and so you didn't have the capacity to make that decision and be comfortable with it in the moment. But when you come back to it a second time or a third time, you can go, yeah, I talked myself into this twice and it still didn't get used and it was still not necessary and I still need to let it go. And you have to come at it more than once sometimes to convince yourself it's okay to let it go. But this is the nature of maintenance of your space, right? We're always going to be decluttering. We're always going to be deciding, does this thing need to be in my space or does this thing need to leave my space? And you'll be asking those questions about the stuff in your environment forever, ever, ever. So just keep asking it. Everything that goes out is one less thing you have to manage.
Karen commented, I have removed as many flat surfaces as I could. It helped. And I understand that. Every horizontal space becomes an invitation to clutter.
Well, and I guess if you're really saying that you're forcing yourself to make a decision about what to do with it instead of going, I'm just going to leave it here and not think about it. So if you don't have a bunch of horizontal surfaces, then you have to be more deliberate in the moment about deciding what you're going to do with something. And that's great. If that works for you, that's awesome. If you're comfortable with tricking yourself into making the decision even when you don't feel like it and it works, awesome. Congratulations on working it out. That's a good solution.
I think Joe makes a good point, which is, yes, we have to sort of negotiate with our partners and children and parents and anyone else who shares the space, but we also sort of have to negotiate among our own conflicting tendencies. Yeah. So I sort of, on paper, I would like to live in a beautiful model home museum looking space. But the one time I dated someone who had kind of one of those museum model home places, I never felt comfortable that I could set a glass of water down on the coffee table.
Right? Like it looked good, but you didn't feel welcome there. And that's a presence thing. That's like, somebody wanted it to be pretty and somebody else wanted to feel calm and comfortable and relaxed in it, and they didn't jive. This is why we negotiate, right? Because there's going to be somebody that wants the space to look like Architectural Digest, and there's going to be somebody else that's like, no, I don't want to have to work that hard to keep it looking like Architectural Digest. I just want to be able to reach over and get my newspaper.
Yeah, and if I can't see my keys, I can't find my keys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. I do. And it's why, you get married and you get the crapshoot about who you fall in love with and what kind of an organizer and how they like their environment and how much stuff they like around them. And, whatever that marriage is between the two of you, you guys got to take your personalities and come up with some compromise. And if you don't ever come up with any compromise and you don't have honest discussions about it, then, I show up and y'all been fighting about it for 25 years. And it's really an unpleasant process to deal with. So, save yourself the fight, have the conversations, and try to be accommodating for all.
Okay, we're about out of time. So let's wrap up.
Okay, all right. Great.
Before we go, I want to let everyone know about our upcoming events. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, October 24th at 7 p.m. That's at a Healing Collective in Houston. That one's live. Well, this is live too, but that one's live in person.
In person, like you get to come and sit in the room and listen to us talk.
In November, we'll meet online on Tuesday, the 26th at 12:01 p.m. Central Time. YouTube viewers, we'd love for you to join us live. You can visit our website to RSVP or for more information. We'll announce topics for both of these events soon. If you'd like to receive notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the Meetup group at meetup.com/Houston-clutter-coaching. You can also follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our mailing list. And the Facebook thing worked great today, so I think we will stream live on Facebook
in the future.
In the future, and maybe with more warning than we did today. Uh, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions and topic suggestions in the YouTube comments or on Facebook. And you can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Yay. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I really appreciate that you were so chatty with me today. I love it when I get live questions. So come back and make some more questions for me later. All right. See ya.